Hello, I'm Janice Karen, Director of Policy, Technology, and Innovation at the Massachusetts Health Data Consortium, or MHDC. I run our Data Governance Collaborative, also known as the DGC. We start each of our weekly meetings with a series of industry quick updates to learn about new and proposed regulations, laws, standards, industry initiatives, and other activity. Join us for this week's updates. So the first update, we mentioned this very briefly last week, but hadn't had a chance to look at it at all. ONC has an annual report to Congress. This covers 2022. It's a reasonably lengthy document that has a lot of stuff in it, so we will do a deeper dive later as the main topic. But for now, just sort of an overview. It talks about, it provides some context at the start, and that's where I pulled these from. So the main sort of the range of topics that it's talking about, concepts, is sort of the current state of access, exchange, and use of EHI, where there are barriers and some recommendations. And it does that within specific sections on areas that they cover or that they have oversight on or that they care about. And so those areas you can see listed. I'm not going to read all of them, but obviously some of them that are particularly important to us are improvements in certified health IT and user experiences, advancement of standards, coordination of health IT efforts, protection and security of EHI. But really, if you look at that list, we care about all of them. So I recommend this report, but we'll be diving into it. We'll be looking at it in detail and dissecting it in much greater detail at a future meeting. Any questions or comments for now? All right, moving on then. This was very interesting. There were some prior authorization statistics for 2021 analyzed by Kaiser Family Foundation. This is public data that gets released, but they basically did a really nice report about it. And some of the interesting things that they pointed out. So there were more than 35 million prior authorization requests submitted in 2021. And they actually point out that they don't have 100% of the data. So all of these numbers are a little bit low. There was some non-conformance to reporting and things like that. So payers had a range from having 0.3 prior authorization requests per enrollee up to 2.9. Most folks were in the higher half of that range. In terms of payers, they had about, I want to say they listed about 12 to 15 payers individually. And it was interesting. They didn't necessarily make these correlations, but you could make some correlations between the people who had high numbers in one area and low numbers in another. So that was part of what I found really interesting about this report. So of the 35 million requests, more than 2 million of them were either fully or partially denied. Only 11% were appealed. But of the 11% that were appealed, 82% resulted in overturning the original decision in whole or part. And the one outlier here, so Kaiser actually had the lowest number of PA requests. They also had the lowest number of denials overturned. Everyone else overturned at least 70% of the denials that were appealed, with 82% across everyone. There was one organization that was at 94%, to give you an idea. Other than, the rate of appeals, the 11% was similar across almost all of the payers. There were like 2 payers that were higher than the others and 1 that was lower. But for the most part, the rest of them were batched right in the same, around 11%. So they point out that what the data they don't have that would be useful is the service distribution of the PAs, what percentage of them were for what services, et cetera. The reasons for the denial, so they don't know how many of them were missing documentation versus not meeting medical needs versus some other reason. And they don't have any data about the decision timeframes, how long it took to actually adjudicate each of them, how long the appeals processes took, et cetera. But I found this report to be extremely interesting. I definitely recommend taking a look. And does anyone have any questions or thoughts about it now? All right. So moving on to the next item, HHS has, in coordination with this Health Sector Coordinating Council, which is a private organization, industry organization with a variety of different groups involved, released a NIST cybersecurity framework implementation guide last week. I have not had a chance to look at it in excruciating detail yet, but it covers topics like guiding risk management principles and best practices, having a structure to understand and apply risk management, and identifying standards, guidelines, and practices to manage things cost effectively. So there's a nice release about it, as well as the actual guide. So feel free to take a look further. I will be reading it further, and if there's anything particularly exciting or interesting in it, I will bring it back to the group. Any questions or comments there? All right. Finally, I wanted to bring this to the group because a lot of the CMS in particular, but a lot of regulations require posting educational information on public websites, and there's a push for equity, which includes accessibility. So I thought pointing out the fact that the federal government isn't perfect about it, but here are some ways that everyone could improve would be helpful. So one thing to note is that they did rank a lot of the data was aggregated across the whole federal government, but they did look at specific agencies in certain areas. And one of those was maturity of their efforts. And what that means is not how well they're accessible, but how well they're managing the process of trying to be accessible. What's their review process like? What's their process for determining what needs to happen to be accessible? Do they have mechanisms for people to write in and point out issues with and how are those processed, etc. So of the 34 federal agencies that they looked at, HHS is 11th. It actually falls in the second highest general category, which in general, from a process perspective, would be pretty good. The thing that's missing between the second highest and the highest, ironically, is actually measurement. So the thing that puts you in the highest category is having clear and concise ways of measuring your progress in this area. And so they did not score up to the point of having the clear measurement, at least not sufficiently to meet that ranking. So moving on to sort of general across the entire federal government, they did better conforming on the internet versus the intranet, which on one hand makes sense because they're more likely to run into a lot of issues for public-facing pages, but it's not particularly nice if you happen to be an employee with an accessibility need, and both should be prioritized. And they also pointed out that, and they didn't specify which one, although if you read everything in the report, you can kind of guess. And it's not HHS. But if you pull out one of the 34 agencies, the conformance drops down to 70% for the internet, from 90 to 70. So the other thing is that these are not all of the pages that are available. They're samples, and they're also typically using automated testing, which doesn't capture all of the issues. And some of these testing mechanisms are actually part of that maturity ranking that we talked about at the top. They also pointed out that 77% of the top downloads were PDFs. Only 20% of them were really conformant with accessibility. People don't tend to think about accessibility needs for PDFs. So if you're an organization that posts a lot of PDFs or intends to put a lot of your information that's required up via PDFs, that's an area to pay attention to. And then also, again, going back to that maturity level concept, only 81% of federal domains have a mechanism for public feedback. So if you're having an accessibility issue, they have a specific way to report that. Now, I would point out that if there are accessibility issues on the pages, you could have a mechanism for reporting that itself is not accessible. And they didn't address that. So I wouldn't necessarily believe that 81% of those are actually accessible if you complain about accessibility. But another key thing, and I didn't go through it in detail, but they had a recommendation section that, and I didn't go through it in detail here. They had a nice recommendation section that anyone could use to improve their accessibility. So you can so here's the report, and you can use it to improve your own accessibility efforts, whether it's for some of the public postings for regulations, or just otherwise generally for your internet and intranet pages. Anyone want to comment or have any questions on that? All right. I hope you learned a lot from our quick updates. If you're interested in finding out more about the DGC and its other activities, email me at dgc@mahealthdata.org. That email address is also on your screen right now. So does anyone want to,